The 2026 elections were just canceled in Louisiana, and your representatives are currently firing their voters to make sure they never lose again. Wow, that is not some dystopian hypothetical. That is literally happening right now. Hey everyone, as the co-director of Universal News Frontier, I'm here to unpack a crisis that is fundamentally rewriting American elections right before our eyes. We are watching the complete transformation of how power is distributed in this country. Let's dive right into this astonishing reality. I mean, consider this unprecedented scenario. An ongoing American election was just outright canceled. Why? Well, politicians have discovered a brand new legal loophole that lets them reverse engineer their electorates. They're essentially picking their voters before their voters can pick them, and it is setting off a massive chain reaction across the entire country. The giant splash that triggered this whole tidal wave, that happened in Louisiana. Governor Jeff Landry pulled the plug on the May 16th U.S. House primaries, literally declaring a state of emergency. And what's really wild about this is that early voting was already underway. Thousands of absentee ballots had already been filled out and returned by everyday citizens. But by suspending the election to redraw the maps, the state was thrown into total electoral chaos, leaving candidates and voters in absolute limbo. Now, the legal earthquake that actually made Louisiana's chaos possible is absolutely fascinating. The stone that caused this splash was an April 2026 Supreme Court ruling called Louisiana v. Callais. For 40 years, right, under the Voting Rights Act, we used something called the results test. Basically, if a district map had the result of diluting minority voting power, it was usually struck down. Simple enough. But the Callais decision completely flipped the script. It shifted the burden to the intent standard. So now you have to prove that the mapmakers explicitly intended to discriminate based on race. But here's where it gets incredibly complicated. Proving someone's internal intent, that's almost impossible. By disentangling race from partisanship, the court effectively handed state legislatures a massive legal safe harbor. The critical loophole is this. Mapmakers can now legally argue that erasing minority opportunity districts is just driven by a partisan strategy to win more seats, rather than racial bias. If they claim their goal is strictly to maximize their political party's advantage, well, the resulting destruction of a minority opportunity district might be completely permissible under the Equal Protection Clause. And this brilliantly illustrates how fast politics moves when a new loophole opens up. That single legal shift instantly set off a rapid-fire chain reaction across the South. Just trace the timeline from the first week of May 2026 alone. It's wild. April 30th, Louisiana drops its emergency declaration. May 4th, Alabama calls a special session. May 5th, Tennessee calls a special session. May 6th, South Carolina passes a procedural amendment to redraw maps. It was an absolute blitz. State after state seized on this new intent standard to launch a massive offensive. They started actively targeting historic minority strongholds. Alabama, for instance, created a contingency plan to literally annul their current court-mandated districts and revert to maps that federal courts had previously found to be racial gerrymanders. Over in South Carolina, procedural steps were immediately taken to allow lawmakers to return and redraw the 6th District, a seat held by Representative Jim Clyburn for 18 terms. They're completely rejecting maps previously mandated by the federal judiciary. To really understand how targeted and precise this maneuvering is, let's look at Memphis, Tennessee. The 9th District there is this historically compact community of interest. But under this new legal framework, mapmakers proposed a strategy known as cracking. The proposed plan surgically moves roughly 60,000 Democratic voters out of that Memphis district, distributing them into neighboring rural areas, and replacing them with 60,000 Republicans. The explicit goal? To artificially manufacture a 9-0 Republican congressional delegation for the state. The real story, though, is that this isn't just a Southern phenomenon at all. It has sparked a retaliatory national arms race. Just consider the projected net seat gains happening nationwide right now. Republicans are using new maps to project a net gain of 5 seats in Texas and 4 in Florida. But Democratic states are fighting fire with fire. California Democrats implemented a map designed to net them 5 additional seats, and Virginia passed a constitutional amendment to allow a redraw projecting a 4-seat Democratic gain. It is a full-blown coast-to-coast retaliation from both sides of the aisle. So the absolutely crucial point is this. What we are witnessing right now is the total collapse of the 10-year mapping tradition. We used to call it the decennial cycle, where lines were only redrawn once every 10 years to reflect the new census data. Well, that era is dead. We are now living in an age of perpetual redistricting. Congressional maps are never actually finished anymore. They are updated the exact moment a state legislature changes hands. purely to maximize partisan advantage. Beneath all this intense partisan back and forth, though, is a profound demographic undertow, a concept that mainstream news is largely missing. It's called dilutive drift. Dilutive drift happens when district lines stay exactly the same, even while populations of color rapidly grow within a state. Because of that new, almost impossible to prove intense standard, that growing population simply doesn't get new representation. Their political voice is legally allowed to just erode over time. And the scale of this drift is staggering. 19. I really want that number to sink in. 19 is the alarming number of Voting Rights Act protected districts across the South that organizations like Fair Fight Action warn could be wiped out entirely. These are minority-influenced districts that could be legally redrawn into safe, completely uncompetitive seats, all because mapmakers can now just claim they are doing it for party politics, not race. Let's move back to Alabama for a second and see how this builds into a glaring demographic disconnect. In Alabama, the latest census data shows the white population actually shrank, while the black population grew to nearly 30% of the state. Yet despite that massive growth, the state fought aggressively to cap minority-influenced seats at just 1. And because proving a specific intent to discriminate is nearly impossible under the new Supreme Court standard, that demographic reality simply doesn't translate into political representation. All of this rapid-fire mapping has led to a bizarre legal paradox that experts are calling the Purcell Principle chaos. The Purcell Principle basically says courts shouldn't change election rules too close to an election because it confuses voters. Makes sense, right? But look at how contradictorily it's being applied right now. In Texas and Florida, courts are leaving disputed, heavily gerrymandered maps in place because they say it's too close to the election. But over in Louisiana, the governor used an emergency declaration to suspend the election entirely to redraw the maps. It is a complete breakdown of a unified rule of law in redistricting. Looking ahead, the tidal wave this creates is going to fundamentally change the House of Representatives. By the 2028 cycle, we are projecting the outright death of the competitive swing district in America. As both parties aggressively gerrymander mid-decade, the House will become a collection of entirely safe seats. And what does that mean for you? It means the only real competitive elections will happen in closed party primaries, pulling candidates further to the extremes and leaving the general election as a mere formality. And that brings us to the immediate fallout. Because of these annulment threats in states like Alabama and emergency primary suspensions in Louisiana, we are facing a massive vacant seat crisis. Multiple congressional seats will likely remain entirely vacant or tied up in complex Supreme Court litigation well into 2027. Ultimately, control of the United States House of Representatives in 2026 may be decided by state-level executive orders and federal judges rather than the American voter casting a ballot. As we watch these maps redraw our reality and redefine our democracy, I want to leave you with this crucial question to discuss at your own kitchen table. Think about this. If a map eliminates a minority opportunity district, but the mapmaker claims they did it for partisan advantage rather than racial bias, should that be legal? Does the intent behind a map matter more than the result of who gets represented? It's a heavy question. Thank you for joining me for this explainer, and I'll see you next time as we continue to unpack the frontier of our changing world.
An investment in knowledge pays the best interest, so why not invest in this channel? Click like and subscribe for more.